Today's panel is made up of hand-picked experts from a diverse range of backgrounds, and we will cover three main topics, those around data security, integrity, and ownership. So without further ado, the first question I'm going to pose, and this one's going to be to the entire panel, is the perception is that as an industry, that we're data poor, and as a result, naive about data and cybersecurity. What I want to know is this your experience, and how will this change as we become more data rich? We'll start with Roberto.
Hi all. So of course, this the digitalization process is always go better. I don't know if you can hear me.
We can, yeah, okay. Got stuck a little bit. Yeah, you're back.
Yeah. Yes, of course, the data security and the digitalization process is something that's going to change the way we are used to run projects, especially in our industry. So this type of concerns are now crucial. You were mentioning data security, and I agree with you. It's a very important topic that can be covered in many ways. And also, not less important is also the topic of data ownership, as you said. So this is something that has an impact. The digitalization itself has an impact, as we can see now. Also, we are meeting not in person. We are meeting via digital conference. So I think this is something that we will increase in the future.
Yeah, thank you. And Borja, from your perspective, from academia and from a slightly different perspective, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, if I got your question correctly, I believe you mentioned about we are seen as a low intense data industry, and I would kind of I don't know if I agree 100%, right? I think maybe it's a provocative point, because I would think the opposite. We are very, very labor and data intense, and we kind of now are emphasizing this with the digitalization, right, of the whole system. So if you think of building information modeling, for example, we're now having this huge amount of information about the projects that go through the different life cycle phases, right? So now it's about, what is the value that, looking at it from the asset point of view, how we should protect that asset and how we should consider the security perspective. So I will like to see what my colleagues say about this, but I will argue that we are very, very data intense, and we should be very aware of that. And it's going to just explode as we are moving into the digitalization of the industry. I will leave it at that.
No, yeah, I think exactly. And you mentioned things like BIM, and as we start utilizing these tools more, we're going to start getting more and more data. So Muks, same question to you from a cyber security expertise and service provider point of view. What types of things are you seeing from the industry?
Hi, Prakash. So what we see is a lot of people in this industry don't feel they are data intensive, as Borja said. But the amount of data available on, let's say, pen and paper is starting to come and become digitized as you get these transformation projects. And then when you get sort of a lot of these different projects, you have buckets of data. Now, what we're seeing is these buckets are starting to get connected. You mentioned BIM is a perfect example where when you have a BIM design ready, they're now connecting it to various parts of the life cycle. So as things start to get more connected, you're going to start to introduce a lot more vulnerabilities on your surface area. And that's where we see a lot of the issues occurring is databases or data warehouses connecting to each other, but the full impact isn't observed as of yet.
Oh, thanks, Muks. And Sultan, your take on this?
I completely agree with the perspective that we are data intense, but I believe the issue here is that before we did not understand or understood the importance of data that we are having. So usually people might think it's designs, construction plans. So what's the purpose? What's the importance of that? It can be shared with the construction team. It can be shared with others in an unsecure means. But that's actually the problem those days, because those assets become even more important than the classified and highly classified data, because this is given the others an access and visualization of your actual assets and where they can access it physically and maybe even digitally. So yes, we are data intensive, and the current world actually realizes the importance of data, and that's why they are trying now to protect it in means that is not impacting their business modules and routines.
Brilliant. And last but not least, Paul.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've been quite fortunate to have worked with a lot of large infrastructure asset owners around the world. What they have in common is they tend to have a lot of assets that already exist. You know, I think there's a statistic that 90% of all assets in use in 2050 already exist. So they've got a large asset base. As Muks said, a lot of that information is now becoming digitized. So I've worked for the likes of London Underground, which is the oldest metro in the world. Some of their assets are 150 years old. And so a lot of that information is now becoming digitized. What they also share is their approach to security is generally one of chaos, on the basis that if they can't find the information about their assets, then probably no one else can.
Yeah.
And then that's changing. And I think in terms of, to answer the second part of the question, in terms of how will that change, I think it has to. And I think there's been a number of quite high profile leaks or, you know, in terms of data and information. That was really the basis upon which part 5 of what was 1192 and is now ISO 19650 originated, to try and give asset owners a bit of guidance in terms of what we call that adopting a security-minded approach to how they manage information. So yeah, I think it's there's still a lot of work to do, but I think it has to change. And a lot of asset owners are starting to employ people and get that expertise now within their organization to support them.
Yeah, brilliant. And I guess conversations like this, where we're bringing the different perspectives, will hopefully help in igniting these conversations and bringing or shedding the spotlight on the importance of this. Okay, so for the next question, from a business perspective, my own experience is that our leaders and particularly IT departments in the organizations that we work in are well aware and understand the risks of cyber threats such as business email compromise and ransomware. But I think from my experience, those threats to our operations and the services that we deliver as an industry are much less understood, and what those impacts might be. So Muks, would you want to share your sort of experience from the companies that related to construction that you work with, and sort of how they deal with these two different aspects of it?
Sure. Yeah. So usually what we find, as you mentioned, Prakash, is business email compromise or ransomware, the business disruption for one, which is ransomware. So it stops your business delivering, or if it's business email compromise, is a financial sort of issue there. So because they're related to either the bottom line, which is finance, they're going to be seen by the leadership because it impacts the bottom line. Now, the other side of the coin is, the espionage. When they're stealing data, when they're viewing your data, or they're only there to understand how your business operates. That doesn't have a monetary value to it. So if it doesn't have a value associated with it, why would somebody want to spend money towards protecting something which they feel they don't need to protect because they haven't classified that data as being essential to the organization? So one of the first things we see is data classification or sensitivities on data isn't fully recognized unless it's related to actual loss of money or loss of business operations.
And similarly, Borja, again, we talk there about some of the sort of business side of the cyber threats and people and espionage. What about things like we're connecting more of our sites during the sort of construction phase? We're connecting more and more equipment and people together, what do you see in terms of the risks from that perspective?
Yes, Prakash, this is actually an excellent point, and we're kind of a little bit underestimating the implication that this is bringing, right? We see in the advantages of having these connected systems, IoT, and all these things, but we're relying more and more into industrial control systems, and those have, embedded vulnerabilities within them. So if you're thinking, for example, a very, very common component in a construction site would be a crane. There's been studies recently, I think last year, there was a study about 17 different manufacturers, and all of them were susceptible to being hacked, meaning that people not, with access or direct access or the rights to get into the system were able to manipulate the performance of the crane. And if you think about it, it has many potential implications, not only on the safety of the workers, but also into the integrity of what is being built, right? Now, if we move a little bit forward into, for example, 3D printing, we see similar components and similar threats, right? We're seeing that we could have implications into the actual structural components that are being printed at the micro level, but also at the safety of the workers around that. So I think it's very important that, as you mentioned, maybe it's more awareness about the IT related elements or implications, but not as much on the OT or the operational technology. And also maybe a couple of good examples might be drawn from the critical infrastructure environment, right? When you look at nuclear power plants, we're all probably familiar with the Stuxnet attacks back in 2010, 2020 in Saudi Arabia, when they were able to hack the oil production facilities and steal data and interrupt operations. So I think it's really, really important that we are, looking at the whole picture, not only at the IT element, but also at the OT component as well.
And Muks, you wanted to add something to this?
Yeah, I think Borja makes a great point about OT or operational technology. It's not designed to be brought online. It was designed in an age where it was segregated. So when you start connecting these systems together, you're connecting systems which aren't designed to be connected, but we connect them because of ease of use, ease of operations, and you inherently are going to have this sort of risk being introduced.
Yeah, no, it's a fantastic point. So as we start connecting some of these, we unintentionally start introducing risk where perhaps one didn't exist before, right? Brilliant points. In terms of this perceived lack of awareness, where do you think this stems from? There's obviously a number of international standards. Paul, you referred to ISO 19650. There's an ISO 27001 around cybersecurity, and as well as local regulations, both all around the region. The UAE has some, KSA is working on them, and we've got GDPR in the EU. So where do you think this sort of lack of awareness and lack of appreciation stems from? So Paul, I'll come to you first on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's been a huge amount of work done over probably the last decade or so in terms of standards development. I think it's probably around the communication and education around of what that means. You mentioned things like GDPR, which is something that was introduced in Europe, looking at personal data. I think just going through that transition. It was only because of the regulation and because it became legal did organizations actually do anything about it. I'm not suggesting for a second that we have to make a lot of this, put regulation around it, but, there is still an apathy, I guess, towards, looking at what standards are available, what they mean to an organization. And a lot of organizations, a bit like Muks was saying, unless it hits their bottom line, or prevents them from doing business, then there's still a reluctancy to do that. So I think it's partly communication, but then there's also education as well within the organization. So the individuals who are responsible, so the consultants and the security personnel within an organization, I think they struggle as well because they're trying to, it's an uphill battle for them because they need the organization on board. The security of information is the same as information management. It's everybody's job. It's not just the IT department who are responsible for it. And I think that investment as an industry, you know, we're sort of known for our lack of investment in development of people. You know, pretty much when people leave university, that's it. You know, but the world is changing, and there's huge skills gaps all over the industry. And I think security is one that's starting to, you know, come to the fore now.
Yeah. And again, same question to you, Sultan. In terms of this lack of awareness across the industry, what do you think is the root cause of it?
I believe it's the responsibility of, I would not say the IT only, but the IT and the information security personnel within each organization. Because as much awareness that the purpose and means of your controls. And I can see that the awareness, you know, in highly regulated countries like Saudi Arabia, UAE, with GDPR, ISO standards, sticking to those standards might become actually a monster. And this is what Borja has said, and I completely acknowledge it, because when it stops your business, simply the top management will start avoiding it and will start to find workarounds. And I believe this is the major responsibility of the personnel who handles those standards. Those standards has been put in place to secure their data. Has not been put in place to stop your business. That's one. And always put yourself in their shoes. They want to deliver something to a client, to an entity, to another. They want to reach a goal. Try to help them achieve it. Don't be a showstopper. That's one. The second thing is that we always care about the awareness to the individuals of the organization. I believe that you have also to customize your awareness to the top management as well, because you need to get their buy-in. And their buy-in does not come with just following the regulations of the country or the ISO standards or GDPR. They need to understand the actual purpose and means of your security standards, and also they need to become a major stakeholder and supportive for you to implement those controls. And that's why you have to do two types of awareness: a generic one to the individuals within the organization, and a specified one to the leaders and top management within your company.
That's an excellent point. Yeah. So as a cybersecurity function, you need to perceive yourself as being part of the solution, not being part of the problem, right? Or being a blocker. I think that's excellent. Muks, yeah, you wanted to chime in here.
Yeah, I think Paul and Sultan make a great point. When you look at the US, they have regulations or breach notifications, which means if you have a breach, you have up to X amount of days to notify the regulator, and there are fines, right? And in GDPR, it's the very similar thing. You have to notify, and there's a fine if you're found guilty. So I think that's what really helps as well, is having strong regulations with a fine, because that, again, as everyone mentioned, hits the bottom line. So organizations are not prepared to invest, so they don't have to pay those fines.
Yeah, hopefully we'll get to a situation where we don't have to have a stick to force us to start thinking about this, and the carrot of the risks helps us to get there before that happens. No, brilliant points. Thank you all. So now we've talked about where we are and the perceptions around cyber and data security. What things can we do to make ourselves become more cyber and data security aware? What types of tools? What types of, I think we've touched on some of those already, but what are other industries doing where we can sort of take that learning and build upon it, or so that we can get to this point much quicker? So here I'll turn to you again, Muks, from your experience doing this in other industries.
Sure. So in most industries, security isn't their forte. It's not their bread and butter. So especially when it comes to construction, it's important to leverage the work which has been done by other industries and use the best practices. Best practices will turn into is an easier way to implement and have change based on not going through the growing pains. So in security, you have a lot of frameworks in place. You have a lot of awareness programs in place. It's utilizing everything that's already been done before and just getting the best version of that within your own industry.
And I remember we were having a discussion earlier about the fact that as an industry, we are already quite risk aware in terms of the physical risks of the things that we do, right? And we embed risk management or very strong risk management protocols from the very early stages, right from design all the way through to when we're going to operate an asset. And introducing this type of cyber risk awareness and cyber risk strategies, risk management strategies, is something I think that is a conversation that we need to start having. So Roberto, you want to make a point on this?
Yeah, I agree with what the other speakers said. What I like to add is that based on my experience, the biggest issue are on the beginning, because what usually happens is that the project owner is using his own platform, our project management platform. And what often happens is that the other contractors are using their own disconnected workflows. So at the end, we end up with double data entry, data loss, and not counting all the delays in schedules. For instance, there is a recent study from 1 year ago, so from Dodge Data and Analytics, that points up this problem, because at a certain point we have the same data being doubled because of the project owner using his own management software, and each contractor is using something different. So the first point is to create something centralized that with data exchange, so that we can avoid these problems.
No, thank you. And Paul, going back to the same question, what can we do to become more risk aware in this space, in the sort of data and cybersecurity space? You have to just unmute yourself. Yeah.
Spacebar wasn't working. I think a lot of it comes down, as I said before, to education. And that stems from education in terms of school, through to colleges, through to university. I think it needs to become certainly a big part of the curriculum, and maybe Borja can shed a bit of light in terms of what's happening in their university. But for the existing professionals, the one that still amazed me is that we didn't have the iPhone 10 years ago and stuff like that. So there's a lot of us who have been around for a while. A lot of these vulnerabilities and risks just weren't there, when we came through. And I think we've all got a responsibility, to develop our own knowledge and understanding of the risks. And then from there, we can then contribute in terms of how we can support organizations and projects to mitigate a lot of those risks. I think a lot of the time, I'm not a security expert, but in my experience, it's always been the enemy within, the individuals actually within the organization who, either, will try and shortcut some of the processes, leaving their laptops on the train, leaving their USB sticks in there. Even on presentations, they'll be putting a USB stick in, leaving it there, and then you find out that half of the company data is on that USB stick because they're taking it home. So yeah, there's a lot of low level knowledge and education that needs to be done just to sort of understand those risks.
Yeah. So that's a great point. And people are still the weakest link in this chain, right? It's all about educating the people. And so Borja, are you starting to see, or are you developing curriculums that are starting to bring this topic in at the very early stages of people's careers, in terms of through the education process, through the university process?
Yes, I'm glad you point that out. Actually, this is one of the struggles that I'm going through every day, right? We're trying to be modernized and make sure that we catch up with what is happening in reality, right? But to change curriculums in academia is not very straightforward. Particularly as a civil engineer, right? Having this very traditional kind of concepts. We are seeing a lot of changes though with we're kind of understanding that, there's a change in the industry in general. So this digitalization is kind of permeating into all the different elements, but we are a bit far into having cybersecurity classes, for example, to civil engineers or to construction managers. But we're working in this direction, particularly in NYU in Abu Dhabi. We have this Center for Cybersecurity, which we are trying to work together with the different divisions, different specialties within engineering, not only civil, but also mechanical, computer science. And we're trying to embed this kind of information and awareness, as you're mentioning, to students, because when they go out, I don't know, 2-3 years from now, this is gonna be their daily issues they have to deal with. And I would like to point out, I don't know if we have time, but we've been talking about regulations and making sure that this is reported. And we find in reality, many companies, if they can, they will not report it because they will face big implications from the public relationships point of view, right? It's gonna damage their image, which might really have a big impact going on in doing business. So actually about 60% of study that was done, 60% of the participants in that study indicated that they will not report an incident, even if it was mandatory to do that. So we have to be aware that, whatever we become aware of is only the tip of the iceberg, and which is, it depends on how you look at it, and we can discuss this maybe later, but it's kind of very like, are kind of a little bit ahead of us. We're trying always to go behind and fixing things. So we should be more proactive, try to pass this early on in the education phases. And it will take some time, but I think we're going in the right direction. And definitely this standard will be a good framework that we can base our analysis and systematically go through these kind of evaluations. Yeah.
No, thank you. Yeah, brilliant. So now on to the last of the 3 topics I mentioned before, in terms of data ownership, and usually what comes with data ownership is also sovereignty, right? And it's something that I often have conversations with clients, and Sultan and I have spoken at great lengths about this in the past. So the 2 things are often confused in terms of data ownership and sovereignty with respect to data security. Can you sort of explain the difference and the importance, particularly in the context of what we're seeing in the Middle East, Sultan?
With pleasure, Prakash. For the data sovereignty and data confidentiality and ownership, before we speak about the sovereignty, we have to understand how to classify our data as being mentioned and how to specify who's the owner for that. As an example, your personal data is under your ownership. There is no sovereignty around it. The sovereignty of those data are related to yourself. If you are a client working with a certain organization, your data as a client is owned by you. It doesn't matter where it's being saved, where it's being hosted, where it's being placed, because this is under my ownership. I own it, and I have all the rights to place it wherever they are. However, when it comes to data related to the government of Saudi Arabia, companies with regard or following the laws of Saudi Arabia, or any client who's working within Saudi Arabia for data related to Saudi Arabia. And I know that this is happening in UAE and a lot of European countries. They have a certain laws to host those data within Saudi Arabia clouds and jurisdiction. So before we look into that topic, we have to define who is the owner of that data. And once you do that appropriately, believe me, there will be no issues in saving them, whatever they are, because you know exactly where to save your data, how it's being managed, and who can come and ask for it in the future. And I believe this is the job of the information technology or the cybersecurity individuals to give such awareness, to give such empowerment to the individuals of the organizations, the leaders, to let them know exactly how they classify, define the ownership, and understand where those data must be saved and kept.
Yeah, but so to a non-cyber security expert myself, a lay person like myself, classifying this data seems like a very daunting task. So, Muks, I wonder if you could sort of help us here in how do we approach this? What's the sort of first steps we would have to take in terms of classifying data, particularly to the types of data that we would start to generate in the construction industry?
So data classification is a difficult problem in any industry, not just construction. With construction, it causes data intensive at the start. The hardest part, as Sultan mentioned, is ownership. So you first have to find the data owner to understand then the classification. Is it going to be sensitive? Is it okay to share with third parties? Is it only for certain folks to read or write? So unless you go, as I think Roberto mentioned earlier, to the start of the project and have a framework in place, have the right approach in place, that when you generate a document, these are the classifications available. When you start to do X, Y, and Z, this is a process, this is the framework, and then enable the subcontractors, which some of them might be another multi-billion-dollar organization, or there might be a 1 or 2 man organization. The smaller companies don't understand, so they need a process. When a process isn't there, people will become flexible and do what they want, and then you lose the classification, and then you start to get a mix of data, and then no one starts using it. Unless you're strict with your data classification from the start, you have to remain very rigid at the start to make sure that it falls through, because you have so many different layers in the supply chain.
Yeah, and I guess, so you're talking about putting frameworks in place, processes in place, and I guess that also chimes into platforms, right? Having a platform where you can host this, and I'll come to you in a second, Borja. But Roberto, I just wanted to ask you, what's the take that you have developed in the platform that you've been building around the hosting and the sovereignty and the ownership of data?
This is an important point. As we already said, the perception of data ownership and more of data as a value, and this value is money, of course, is something that's gonna increase in the future. The solution I mentioned before was a centralized cloud solution that should have data exchanged with all the contractors involved in the project, and the ownership has to be defined at the beginning, because it is it's a little bit shady, because depending on who is running the project, who is buying the license of these solutions where the data will be hosted, then it's not easy to say immediately who is the owner. In theory, it should be the building owner always. But this is something that has to be defined at project start again, because it's the best way, I guess. And this is my take.
No, I really appreciate it. Thank you. And Borja, maybe just 2 minutes before we go to questions from the audience.
Yeah, I just wanted to maybe build up on what you guys are saying. I think it's important we do not forget about the complexity and the length of the supply chain in projects, right? We have very dynamic environments, and we have changes from participants from phase to phase. So it's very important to have these systems and frameworks that my colleagues are mentioning, because we want to make sure we trace of the data, and then we're able to really allocate responsibilities accordingly through all the phases of the project as well. So just wanted to point that out.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think for us particularly, it becomes difficult because of our supply chains being so deep, right? We tend to have very, very, very deep supply chains. And the deeper that we get, I think the more porous the sort of interfaces become, especially in terms of data. And we used to see this even when it was paper, when things weren't digitized on paper, where you'd see drawings lying about, you'd see exchange of information, like Paul mentioned, via USB sticks, and people forgetting to unplug them or leaving them in meeting rooms after a presentation and things like that. And that just now gets exacerbated as we generating more and more information, but as we're working with more and more a wider set of stakeholders. Paul, did you want to mention something in this one?
Yeah, just very quickly, just as a quick shout out from a standards point of view as well. Obviously, we've got part 5 published around security, but a lot of the process within parts 2 and 3 also help and support with the security side of things. So notably, one of the key outputs there is what we call the information protocol, which is the document which sets out not only the ownership, but also the transfer of ownership. and obligations around the use of that information both during and beyond the project as well. So, and there is some, in the UK, there's a template for an information protocol has been developed, but also in terms of the accommodator environment and the status codes and for the suitability for which information can be both exchanged and indeed used. So there's lots of things in there within the process to help with things like ownership as well. And if you don't do those upfront activities, then as you say before, as it goes further down that supply chain, it can be very difficult to try and rein all that back in if you don't get those upfront activities sorted.
Yeah, excellent. So look, that's all the questions that I had for the panel. We've got a number of questions coming in from the audience now. So I'm going to thank you for participating and humoring me with my questions. And we're going to move on to some of the questions from the audience now. So we've had one come in. I think this is it's a bit broad brush, but I guess generally, how long does data need to be kept for? Sultan, if I defer to you on that question.
Sure. Actually, there are two factors deciding how long the data should be kept for, or actually three, not two. The first one, if it's a GDPR compliant, then the data will be kept until the client says delete it, as simple as that. You should not have my data with a simple email or a simple agreement. The data should be deleted immediately. The second point is about the country regulations and the business regulations as well. So if you are dealing with a governmental project or a project related to the country, they have a certain time frame for this data to be saved for. In Saudi Arabia, we have for the non-critical businesses 3 years, 10 years for the critical ones, and the last one is depending on the nature of engagement with you and the client. So some of the clients are having a strategic relationship between both of the entities. So you should not delete their data unless you have the permission from them to do that, and also to ensure that your business will not be interrupted of deleting them. So if you, as an example, if you have some industrial documentations, some industrial designs that has been in the company for over 10, 12, 15, 20 years, if that client is a strategic one, then you should get his endorsement before acting on those data, because you never know when this client will come back saying simply, where is those data? I want to see this information. And you do not want to be in a position where you tell him that, sorry, we have deleted it.
No, thank you. That's a very comprehensive answer. So another question that we've got, are there industry standards for pen testing? I assume pen means penetration testing or employing professional hackers. So Muks, could I defer to you on that one?
Yeah, so there are industry frameworks in place. So you mentioned pen testing the goal is to find, exploit, and determine the risk of architecture vulnerabilities. You have the second, which is sort of red team. On the other hand, is targeted and goal towards testing an organization's detection and response capabilities based on the tactics, techniques, and procedures of a particular threat actor. Now, there's a framework which is really popular in the US called the NIST cybersecurity framework. It covers sort of 5 huge pillars. And one of the pillars is to do with this type of assessment. And it's been regularly updated. It's one of the frameworks which I was talking about earlier, which is an industry standard. And employing that framework means that you're already using the best sort of a best of breed at the start. You're not having to go through the learning process.
Brilliant, thank you. Another question for Sultan. What advice would you give a project owner who is nervous about using cloud-based collaboration vendors due to security reasons, while their current approach to supply chain collaboration is through traditional uncontrolled systems like paper and email?
Actually, I believe that his issue, not security reasons, his convenience. He likes to work with email and paper. So if you want to resolve that issue, you need to tell him, or you need to show him that the cloud solution is much more sufficient, and it will help you in future by having a track record of whatever you do. Give him some samples. There are a lot in the internet. Some examples where the email is not sufficient for tracking records. The paperwork might be destroyed for a reason or another, and you have to have this cloud solution to save your is being saved, classified appropriately, and also backed up appropriately, because this is a trend that's happening within the cloud service provider. So when you give him the flows of the traditional system that he's using, believe me, he will by default go to the cloud. And at the same time, I don't believe that the security reasons are the issues, because also you have to understand what does he mean by security reasons. We all know that cloud is far more secured than using a paper. So that's an ABC question, but you need to get to his level, understand why he is happy to use emails and paper, and then suggest to him something that will enhance his work, will boost his performance, and he will be benefited from.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's part of a more broader digital transformation where it's the education and the people side of that, making sure that they understand the benefits of utilizing the technology like clouds. So the other side of that, Sultan, is what we touched on before, is about data sovereignty, and this is particularly an issue that comes up a lot in Saudi Arabia, right? About do I have to host all of my data in Kingdom? Can I use publicly available clouds which have servers or server nodes outside of Kingdom? Maybe even in friendly countries like Bahrain or UAE. So I think linked to this question, if you could give a little bit of your views on that.
Honestly, when the data is related to the country, you have to stick to the regulations by saving it within Saudi Arabia. However, it doesn't mean that you should not save those data in a public cloud, because simply you can do a small integration with these public clouds to host your data only within the country of Saudi Arabia. That's, I think, the worry that we have. Rather than utilizing or capitalizing fully in a cloud that's not hosted in Saudi Arabia, have for yourself an instance that's replicated with the cloud. However, the data that you own is saved and processed within your data, within the cloud that is hosted in Saudi Arabia. I think that's the most feasible solution that satisfies both parties. And on the other hand, if you can, I know that in Saudi Arabia, they have a lot of alternatives with the same performance and same prices. So you can, for those critical data, for those highly classified information, just host them within those data centers to eliminate any unsuspected questions that might be asked you why you hosted out.
Brilliant. Thank you so much.